I hadn't played a SaGa game until a couple of years ago when I played Romancing Saga 3 and SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions. I was always a Final Fantasy fan, and so I was blown away by how good those games were, and how they constantly subverted my expectations with their non-linear approach. I had high hopes for SaGa Frontier, and while it is good, it's not on the level of Romancing Saga 3 and SaGa Scarlet Grace. When you start the game, you can choose from 8 different characters, and they each have their own unique storyline. When Square-Enix sent the review code, they recommended Red as the first character to play as, so that's who I picked. His story is pretty straightforward. His family was killed by an evil organization called Black X, and he needs to track them down and get his revenge. I can't comment on the other storylines, but the way the plot unfolds for Red is one of the weakest elements in SaGa Frontier. There's very little dialogue, so characters are not developed at all, and the cutscenes are so sparse that nothing consequential happens for most of the playthrough. At times there are plot threads that go nowhere, and when you arrive at moments where a character is about to tell you something interesting, the cutscene ends abruptly. I was not invested or interested in the character or story, because they didn't really make an effort to flesh them out. In terms of gameplay, you encounter enemies on the screen, and this triggers a turn-based battle. You can attack or use a skill that requires WP to use. When you attack an enemy, you may have the chance to spark or unlock a new skill for that character, which you can use later. Like Romancing Saga 3, there isn't a visible experience points and leveling system. Instead, stats can increase at the end of each battle. It can feel random as to when you level your HP or strength and when you don't, but I didn't have a problem with this, as the game is pretty generous at leveling you up, particularly for the first 10 hours of the game. You also have HP for your hit points and LP for your life points. When your HP reaches 0, you lose a life point. If all of a character's life points are depleted, then they can't be used again until they rest at an inn. If Red's life points get depleted, then it's game over. The first 8 to 10 hours are notable though, and I want to talk about my experience here. The game provides you with very little direction. This was the same in Romancing Saga 3. You would need to visit a town, talk to people, you may discover a new side quest or new location to visit. There's an element of that here, but for the first few hours you visit a location and you need to complete a very specific objective to finish that level. Once you've completed that objective, you return to the ship, the Cygnus, and then you can go to the next level. It's extremely linear for the first few hours, and with barely any signposting of what you need to do. I found myself reaching for a guide often. The first area you visit, there are 4 locations, and I had to visit one of them, talk to someone to trigger a battle, and then go to another location to trigger another battle to finish the level. I had no idea I had to do this. I explored, got into some fights with enemies, and died a lot, which I'll talk more about later, and when I got to a boss, it killed me with one hit. That's when I searched for a guide and realised I hadn't even visited the location I needed to go to. The next area had 4 places to visit. I went to each one and talked to a few characters, but there was no battle or dungeons to explore. I wasted time searching and searching before looking at a guide again, and realising the only objective of that area was to talk to someone and then return to my ship. The next event really made me dislike the game. You basically have to defeat some enemies, but there's a huge difficulty spike to beat them, and eventually you have to fight the boss who's got an even bigger difficulty spike. I realised I had to grind a lot, but I was dying 60% of the time because even the basic enemies were super tough. Slowly my character got stronger, but I was still not strong enough to beat the tougher enemies or beat the boss. Whenever you encounter an enemy, the game randomizes what you actually fight. It could be one weak enemy or a party of really strong ones. I was saving after every battle just in case I lost the next battle. I was reloading the game often when I lost too many life points, but what annoyed me is that there's no option to return to the title screen or load a save. I had to shut down the game and restart it and load the save. Since I was dying so often, this became very tedious. This happened a lot, by the way, through my playthrough, because the difficulty spikes are so big and so frequent. I had to spend hours grinding to beat that boss, and I really didn't enjoy the game at that point. I was ready to give up, but I'm glad I didn't. After around 12 hours, the game opens up, and you can visit different areas, visit towns, dungeons full of enemies, go on side missions and recruit new party members. It got much better from that point on, and you also have clearer objectives, so you felt like there's some point to the game. The difficulty spikes were still ridiculous at times, and even with hours of grinding, there were still bosses I struggled on, but at least it had become a good RPG. I haven't played many RPGs with a more futuristic setting. I generally prefer the more fantasy setting, but I found the world and locations really interesting. I wish there was more development of the lore, because I found it a fascinating world. Even though I did eventually enjoy the game, I still struggle to recommend it. The story and character development is sparse, there's no explanation as to what you're supposed to be doing for the first few hours of the game, the difficulty spikes are ridiculous, forcing you to grind, and there are some basic quality of life features, like the option to load a save file, that are missing. If you get past the first 12 hours, you have a good game here, but I think if you're an old school RPG fan, then Romancing Saga 3 and SaGa Scarlet Grace Ambitions are far better games. So guys, are you planning to pick up SaGa Frontier? And if you played it already, what did you think? Leave a comment below, and as always, thanks for watching.